Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AP Lit Review. And we are this week looking at Unit 9 and just talking about that open-ended question, larger novels, plays possibly, and just how we deal with them and think about them. I am Susan Barber from a stormy Atlanta, Georgia today, Grady High School. And of course, here is my co-teacher, Bear, hanging out with us today. And with me is Mr. Escobar.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carlos Escobar from Miami, Florida, from Felix Varela Senior High School. Like Ms. Barber said, we're tackling longer fiction. We're tackling novels and plays this week, and that has brought a lot of interesting emails from folks talking about what they read in their classrooms and how they're using some of our lessons. I know, for example, all the kids at Fredericksburg High School in Texas are gathered, and they're talking about the things that we're doing. So we want to say hello to them. And let's dive right in. As usual, we're going to begin with what our homework was yesterday for today.
So yesterday we looked at the 2016 prompt. Many works of literature contain a character who intentionally deceives others. The character's dishonesty may be intended either to help or to hurt. Such a character, for example, may choose to mislead others for personal safety, to spare someone's feelings, or to carry out a crime. Choose a novel or play in which a character deceives others. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze the motives for your character's deception and discuss how the deception contributes to the meaning of the work as a whole. So yesterday, we were not asking you to write a whole essay, but just to be thinking about how you would tackle this question. And so your task was to choose a character from a novel that you've read this year, or maybe even one in the last couple of years if it's fresh in your memory, and write 2 or 3 claims about that character's motives, and then connect these to a central idea in the text. And immediately things that came to my mind that we had read in class was Othello. That's just a perfect example with Iago, would make for a great essay. I also thought about The Handmaid's Tale, possibly. I love that Miss Lepore chimed in and talked about her class and how they had discussed texts like Master Harold, King Lear, The Color Purple. So there are lots and lots of texts that apply to this.
And some of the ones that we were thinking about as possible texts are Death of a Salesman, Linden Hills, and The Kite Runner. You know, one of the exciting things I think whenever readers, whether it be teachers or students, get together, is the ability to talk about books, what we've read, what we've taught, and some of the books that we enjoy. So here are the books we're talking about right now for this slide are Death of a Salesman, which perhaps many of you have read, Linden Hills, which I think is one of the best novels ever written. So if you've never checked it out, go ahead and do so. And a very worn copy of The Kite Runner, which I know is a fan favorite out there. So let's look at how, with these 3 books, we might be able to tackle the prompt that Ms. Barber was talking about. With Death of a Salesman, there's many deception there, right? But we're focusing, for example, on Biff's decision not to tell his mother or his brother about their father's infidelity. Why does Biff decide to do this, and how does that connect to the meaning of the work as a whole is a major question we would have to tackle. In Linden Hills, we have Dr. Braithwaite, who at the end of the novel we learn is aware of all these things that are happening throughout the community, and yet he does nothing about it. For those of you who have read it, try to recall why it is that he does nothing about it, and then you're going to be able to, I think, ascertain Naylor's criticism of that inaction on his part. And in The Kite Runner, again, there's many instances of deception, but there's that notion that Baba never quite tells Amir everything about the family. And I don't want to reveal anything for those of you who might be in the middle of reading any of these, but we do learn that Amir finds out many things after the fact. So if we consider why it is that Baba kept these things, then we'll get into Husseini's head, I think, a little bit more. These bullet points, however, are the what, right? What is the deception in each of these texts? Then we have to consider why. Why is it that Biff, Braithwaite, and Baba choose to deceive the people they know or love? And as the prompt suggested, it's not always to hurt. Sometimes it's to protect. So consider that duality in the prompt as well. And ultimately, whatever it is that you are selecting for this prompt, remember to connect it to a central idea or the work as a whole. And we're familiar with that part of the prompt, I hope. So these are the possibilities for that text.
And just like we were talking about yesterday, we're looking at these very specific scenes, and then we're tying them to broader context. And we're still, all of the things that we're looking at today, the same thing applies. Small specific scenes or different elements, and then how does that tie to the broader context or your interpretation of the work. So today, our goal is we want to explain the function of a significant event or maybe a related series of events in the plot. And again, we're explaining these so we can talk about exactly what we see happening in them, but then how does that help us to look at the text through a broader lens? And there are a couple of different ways that we can approach these. One is looking, we can see a significant event or series of events, and that highlights competing value systems. We're going to talk about this in a second. The one we're really going to focus on today, however, is that sometimes a significant event in a novel will create this sense of anticipation or suspense, and that drives the plot in the novel. And it also causes characters to react. And so that kind of forces change on the characters. So thinking about how these two different things work, if we think about a competing value system and how events of a plot highlight that, let's think about Hamlet. That's a perfect example because we can see that events in Hamlet will reveal differing views of Hamlet and Claudius. So like one event, maybe when we hear that the ghost of King Hamlet appears, then that event gives us opportunity to see how these two different characters react. Or possibly when Polonius dies, again, we're able to, their value systems are highlighted by the way they react to that one event. How do Hamlet and Claudius's personal philosophies differ? How do these differences ignite the conflict between them? So the plot actually helps move character development forward. It's more than just an event happening. It's to showcase other things. So that's one way, and that's probably the easier way to think about plot. Today, we're going to think about how does plot create anticipation and build suspense in a novel, and then what does that accomplish in terms of us thinking of a novel in broader context. So if we think about The Road, and I don't want to spoil this for any of you and highly recommend if you have not read it, but how do the final moments in Cormac McCarthy's The Road work together to create a sense of anticipation and suspense? And we can even think about, once we think about these final moments, it's easy to go back and pinpoint scenes that kind of relate and build up to that. And then how are they significant to the broader themes of the novel? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, the function of plot. And it's important when we think about this and when we think about specific scenes to differentiate between summary of a scene and analysis of a scene. Very, very important.
That's right. And that is exactly the distinction that we have to make, right? Already, though, it excites me that we've mentioned so many titles within just a few minutes, right? So hopefully people out there are jotting some of these down. Again, we've talked about the Kite Runner, we've talked about Linden Hills, we've talked about Death of a Salesman. In the prior video, we spoke about Frankenstein, right? That was what we focused on yesterday. And, considering the events that are taking place right now, I think it's difficult sometimes. And I don't want it to sound insensitive when we talk about a silver lining, right? Um, but if we are home and we shouldn't be going out, then I think reading is definitely a great viable option, right? I mean, even in my house, right? Like my daughter's constantly reading. My son picked up Frankenstein. As a family, we're reading Emma. Like these are the things that we're doing today. And we're going to talk today about another play, as a matter of fact, that maybe some of you have read. But let's review again. It's not summary that's important here. The goal is always analysis, but because we've all read different titles, because we've all had different experiences in the classroom, we are going to start with summary so that we have some firm footing, so we all understand the plot of the text that we're going to be talking about today. But the purpose of looking at plot, again, it's not about the storytelling, it's not about the story itself, but it's about the arrangement of the parts and how do these arrangements, when we focus on them, how do they help us interpret the deeper meaning in the text? So for today, we're going to be looking at A Doll's House. Some of you may have read this, and you may have read it as A Doll House, and that's a possibility as well. This is a work in translation, so the translation allows for the two possibilities, and that in and of itself could be a great discussion, right? Is this a dollhouse or is it this a doll's house? That possession is a critical aspect of this play. And to give a brief summary, again, just so that we can all follow along, this is the story of a couple, and the husband, Torvald, was ill for a while, and his wife was able to secure the money that they needed to take a vacation, to take a break, so that he could become healthier. But the way that she got this money was not through a loan with her father, as the husband suspects, but she actually took out a loan herself and she signed her father's name. All right. So she forges her father's name. The problem is the person who loaned her the money is aware of the forgery. And now this man might be fired from the bank, and the wife's husband is actually going to become the manager of the bank. So the suspense here is created by the fact that this man's about to lose his job, but the husband, the protagonist in the story, can save him, and he's going to use the wife's forgery to ensure that he can keep his position. So there's a lot of fodder right there for tremendous suspense and anticipation. But how exactly does Ibsen create this through the development of the plot? We're going to look at the appearance of Krogstad in 3 acts, okay, in the 3 acts of the play. In the first act, Krogstad says, "Mrs. Helmer, you evidently do not realize clearly what it is that you have been guilty of. Foolish or not, it is the law by which you will be judged if I produce this paper in court." He is already establishing the his leverage, and his leverage is, if I show this piece of paper, if I demonstrate that you have committed forgery, it will destroy your family, it will end your husband's career. Now Nora says, but I did it to save my family. Surely the law will understand that I did it out of love and out of a sense of a desire to help. And he explains to her, absolutely not, the law is the law. The second time that Krogstad appears is in Act 2, and there he says, well, now I have warned you. Do not do anything foolish. When Helmer, this is Helmer Torvald, the husband, when Helmer has had my letter, I shall expect a message from him. And be sure you remember that it is your husband himself who has forced me into such ways as this again. I will never forgive him for that. Goodbye, Mrs. Helmer. So Krogstad believes that he's about to lose his job, that Torvald will fire him. So now he has to execute the plan. The threat came in Act 1 and Act 2, specifically right at the end of Act 2, he will deliver the letter revealing what he has done. When Krogstad appears the third time, he simply says, I have never had such an amazing piece of good fortune in my life. There's a turn. Things are looking up for Krogstad. However, the letter is still in the letterbox. It's still in the mailbox, if you will. So his demise of this household is already enacted. And as you can tell from the way that Ibsen creates drama or anticipation, giving us piecemeal the events that lead to this crescendo, then as an audience member, you are dying at this moment. You can't believe that the letter's in the box. Torvald continuously walks right past the letter box. He's about to get it, and poor Nora does all kinds of things to try to distract him. But ultimately, well, you have to read it to find out what ultimately happens. But the question we have to ask ourselves here is, what do these related set of events convey about the work as a whole? How do they combine to reveal Ibsen's central ideas in the play? Ibsen purposely creates this anticipation, purposely creates this suspense, right? Why would he do so? Well, what we do know is that as the play progresses, as the plot, if you will, progresses, the anticipation rises. That simple understanding of the organizational pattern in the play makes us question, why does Ibsen create his structure in this way? Here's a possible interpretation, but as usual, we won't provide you with a full answer because that's your job. A possible interpretation for this structural component is Henrik Ibsen augments the play suspense through Krogstad's few, though significant, appearances. The rising anticipation Ibsen creates ultimately reflects the magnitude of what is at stake at the core of this play. And then I put a colon, and we can talk about punctuation for a second. What usually follows a colon, right? And in this sense, it's going to be an examination of what's at the core of this play. And because there are multiple plausible interpretations, we're going to leave that blank. That portion of the prompt that usually asks you to speak about the meaning of the work as a whole is not about a single definitive right answer, but it is about a claim that is in line with all the events in the story. And this is where you would come in. So whatever text you could use to answer this prompt, or whatever text you could use to discuss plot structure, you make sure that you connect it to the meaning of the work as a whole somewhere at some point within that introduction.
So now we want to look at getting you thinking about what books do you feel that you could confidently unpack. And so we're going to have you list a novel, list all of the novels, think about all of the novels and plays that you have read this year. We're going to start populating a list. I know in my class, some of the things that we have read this year, we all read Frankenstein, and my kids have done a lot of choice reading. So this list is going to look different for every student. A lot of them read 1984. A lot have read Handmaid's Tale, Southernmost, The Road. Whichever novel you've read, go ahead and think about that, and then give some thought to what is the structure of that novel. How is suspense built? How is the plot laid out? And then we want to take that to the next step. What does all of that mean? How does that reinforce? How can that add meaning to a broader context of the work?
Yeah, and right now it really is a good time for students to generate that list. I know that some students have been out of school now for 2-3 weeks, right? It seems. And I think that we start to forget, you know, did I have a summer reading assignment? What did I read that first 9 weeks? Have I had any independent reading? So right now it's a good time for you to connect with your friends, connect with your teachers, and make sure that you do generate that list as we've asked you to complete here. And this is a list that you're going to use for tonight's homework, for tomorrow's lesson, and for tomorrow's homework as well. But it is an important list for you to keep in mind, because we don't want you to forget anything that you've already worked with this year.
And I mean, I think we're also interested. If you want to shoot us an email, I would love to know what y'all are reading. I find this so fascinating, just what books kids have read and connected with. I love to know what you as a student have really connected with and enjoyed reading. So if you have time, send us an email. I would love to see that.
Yeah, and Ms. Barber had spoken to you about how it might be easier to talk about the competing value systems than the creation of suspense and anticipation. And I think that she's definitely right about what she said. But to add to that, it might also be more common to have as plot features this notion of competing value systems, right? Not all books create suspense or anticipation, but there usually is some sort of conflict of philosophies, of thought processes. And I'm thinking about, you know, some of the more common texts in AP Lit, or common texts in high school reading in general, right? Like, for example, Macbeth. How does the plot of Macbeth highlight competing value systems? If you've read that play, you got to talk about, you know, does Macbeth have a different set of value systems from Lady Macbeth? Or do they have a different, as a family, do they have a different set of value systems as Banquo or Duncan? And you should be able to take all of the text that you've read this year and talk about those competing value systems. Yesterday, Ms. Barber, you spoke about Frankenstein. I'm sure that there are competing value systems there as well, even if, and this is the key, right? When you're talking about long works and when you're talking about question 3, if you will, sometimes the answer lies in the text and not in the class discussion. Ms. Barber, I don't normally teach Frankenstein, but Ms. Barber does, and there's a great chance that she doesn't talk about competing value systems when she talks about Frankenstein. She probably talks about a dozen other things, and she never uses that phrase. So when you approach the AP exam and you look at a question 3, or when you're taking a college level course at the university and a professor, you know, on a midterm, on a final gives you an essay, it's not just about what was talked about in class. In fact, during the class time, during the class period, we can't possibly unpack all the possibilities for every text. So if we can talk about Frankenstein for a second, Ms. Barber, the competing value systems, they're definitely there, are they not?
Absolutely. I mean, you can certainly see just, I mean, you can look at Victor, Dr. Frankenstein in The Creature, and see how different plot events show their values, or Walton and Victor. And again, I think it's what's important to remember is like characterization, or like words and phrases that we talked about with poetry last week. All of these things that we're talking about, they are ways for you to enter the text and make meaning of them. So we're
Absolutely.
just wanting to give you more and more tools that will help you enter into a text and figure out what is the broader meaning of this text. And again, like Mr. Escobar said, it's not one thing, but how did these things help me to see a bigger picture as to what the author is speaking about?
Absolutely. It's about opening up the text and not closing it,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
so yesterday's video, we did that with characterization, and we saw how if we talk about characterization, it's not just saying, oh, the character is Hamlet, but you showed the iceberg, right? The most interesting aspects of Hamlet are those things that are below the surface, below the water of that picture that you showed. When you're talking about plot, it's not just about summary. It's about the analysis of the story itself. But if you really want to get, again, we're talking about Unit 9, we're talking about the end of the course, we're talking about the greatest level of complexity here. Look at the arrangement of the plot. why do we begin where we begin? Why do we end where we end? And why are we given this information in that particular order? I'll go back to, I mentioned 100 Years of Solitude a few lessons ago, and I just love the beginning of that novel. The first line is, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendía would remember the distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. I mean, where are we, right? Are we in the present, in the future, in the past? Well, we're all over the place there. Why would Garcia Marquez have selected that as a feature of his storytelling? And when we get into the structural components, that's when you're talking about the I think the most sophisticated aspects of analysis.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is really some of the highest level thinking that you're going to be asked to do in this class. But once you're able to start wrapping your mind around structure in poetry, structure in short stories, structure in longer text, it does just open up more meaning for you. And that's the goal for us as readers throughout life. So let's look at what we talked about today. Thinking about structure, or thinking about a significant event or a series of events in the plot, and not just identifying those, but thinking, how does this shed light on a broader context of the plot? So here's some key questions. Again, these questions are just ways for you to help make meaning of this. What event in the plot has significant relationship to a character, conflict, another event, a thematic idea? And what is that relationship? And I think it's important. Sometimes, like, we read novels, especially when you're reading a longer work, like you'll read a scene and you'll think, this is really important. I recognize its importance, and I may not understand right now why it's important. And you may not fully understand that until you finish the novel and see how it all fits together. So maybe you can bookmark that scene and go back and think on that after you finish the whole novel. How is an event and a plot a cause and effect for another event? You know, one thing, one action in a plot will often trigger a response in a character that propels the plot forward. So thinking about how all of those fit together, and specifically how plot affects characters' choices. How does an event or related series of event cause and develop and resolve a conflict? And again, this is something that as we get near the end of the novel, it's easier to see how these pieces fit together.
And I think we have to focus on that final bullet, right? Because that is ultimately what we're trying to do. How do these events or related set of events contribute to the meaning of the work as a whole? There was for those diehards out there who remember every single Q3, there was one, and I don't recall the year, but there was one about parallel or recurring events. And that's an interesting one. That may be one that you would want to, extend the conversation now with your students. If we think, for example, I had held up the kite runner. If we think of the kite runner, there are some parallel events. There's a series of stadium scenes. There are two scenes where watches or money is placed under a mattress. If we look at these two events and we ask ourselves, why would an author repeat something? Why write it again? Well, there has to be a difference. There has to be a pivot. And if we analyze what the pivot is, we're going to understand the development of the character. We're going to understand the development of the plot. And at that point, we'll talk about how these changing parallel events contribute to the meaning of the work as a whole. So that final question is something really, really critical, I think, in our analysis.
So for tonight's homework or tonight's practice, this is what we would like for you to do. We're going to look at the 1997 prompt. This is such a fascinating prompt, and it's one that I don't think I've ever used in class, but I'm definitely going to start. Novels and plays often include scenes of weddings, funerals, parties, and other social occasions. Such scenes may reveal the values of the characters and the society in which they live. Select a novel or a play that includes such a scene, and in a focused essay, discuss the contribution the scene makes to the meaning of the work as a whole. You may choose a work, and we're not giving you the ones listed below. So we're just asking you, think from that list that you've populated, what fits here? And then what we would like for you to do tonight, and hopefully have discussions with your teachers about things you've read in class and exactly how this plays out. Select a novel that includes such a scene. Write 2 or 3 claims about the significance of that scene. Again, we're not wanting to summarize the plot, but instead we want to think about its relationship to the central idea in a text. I already have a couple of novels that immediately come to mind, and I'm just going to say them now. Is that okay? Do I have to wait till tomorrow?
Oh, why not? Let's go ahead. Let's. But they
Immediately.
can't use these for homework, though. They have to choose their own.
So I think about Mudbound that opens and they are digging a grave. I mean, when you open with a funeral, like something's going on there. And then As I Lay Dying, same thing. You know, we see they're building a casket for the mom who is about to die, and we're going to have this funeral. And golly, talk about even today's lessons, like all of these significant events that lead to that. So immediately my mind is already spinning, and hopefully yours is too, with ideas of things that would work for this. So we want you to think about that. Think about a scene. Think about the significance of that scene and how it opens up broader meanings of the work.
Yeah, and I want to clarify 2 things for audience. There's a reason why we're not asking you to write the essays yet, and the reason is that we are going to walk through the essay writing process throughout some of these lessons, and we haven't gotten to that just yet. However, this Thursday, we're already going to be talking about thesis, and Friday, I believe, is a commentary and evidence, perhaps. And so we're not asking students to do things that we haven't taught yet. And I think that's just good classroom practice, and we're treating this as our classroom. So we're having them write claims. However, for those of you who are using these videos as extensions of the classroom, and you are certainly welcome. I mean, you should be writing these essays, right, with your students if you choose to. Then let me give students a piece of advice here, and let me speak to teachers about how I use this prompt. This is a very good prompt to, I think it encourages students to provide plot summary, although that's not the intent. So it's a good learning tool, and it's not a gotcha tool, right? I mean, we have to be, I think, we have to warn students before they delve into it. We're asking you to discuss the significance of a scene. We're not asking you to tell us about a scene. So let me give you an example. The shoe finally fits in Cinderella, right? What is the significance of that? How does that single event transform that character, her life, her sister's lives, rather than this man goes house to house and tries on shoes and it doesn't fit, and then it fits, and then, we don't need the storytelling, we need the significance. So it's a great prompt to practice that, because I know that's something that we all struggle with our own students, which is how do we steer them away from plot and steer them towards analysis. So I encourage the use of this one, and I look forward to those claims that will be coming in, probably via some of the Facebook groups that you're part of, Ms. Barber, but we'll definitely discuss them tomorrow.
So again, if you know students who don't have access to the internet or device, have them reach out here, especially teachers, if you can get this information out. We're really trying, College Board is trying to solve this problem for people. So we are looking forward to being with you tomorrow, and we'll again be talking about Unit 9 and learning more ways that we can just find tools that help us to get into a text and open it up. I think we're talking about narrator and narrator perspective tomorrow. So until then, hope you have a great rest of the day. Wash your hands, stay well.
Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.